On the prequel to the 28th episode, we're learning about laying thematic groundwork and previewing Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Hello and welcome back to the prequel to the 28th episode of This Film Is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. We are on the second installation of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Rousing episode, very successful, one of our most downloaded in the first few days of all time, as I sort of expected it would be. But yes, it's doing very well, which is exciting. Hopefully we have some new listeners maybe that have found it for the first time. If so, this is our prequel episodes, which we do. They're usually a little bit shorter. We usually talk about some, but they're also maybe more informative in some ways. Not more informative, but we have our Learning Things with This Film Is Lit segment where we talk about literary techniques and that sort of thing, and sometimes film techniques based on techniques. And especially if we can find a way to where they correlate. Where one episode we talked about epistolary novels and what that is, and then how that is portrayed in film, with the example being The Martian. So you can go back and listen to that prequel episode if you haven't heard it. But so we like to do things like that in the prequel episodes. That's what these are. And then we preview, which is kind of just fun facts and interesting tidbits about the upcoming movie/book. So that's what these are. Like I said, they're usually a little bit shorter. So let's get into our first segment, Learning Things with This Film Is Lit, laying thematic groundwork.
No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
Okay, so that's what I called it. I called it laying thematic groundwork. We're not going to talk about like how to do that or anything like that.
This isn't we're not teaching you how to do these things. It's just sort of a cursory, introductory to some concepts type of thing. Right,
and we're going to talk a little bit specifically about what Rowling does in this book. Yeah. So on our last episode, the main episode about Sorcerer's Stone, we talked a little bit about Rowling's impressive planning ahead skills. And this is kind of like an offshoot of that. Yeah.
We mentioned how she teases major plot points that come way later, not even in the book, way later in the series. In the first book, that the first time you're reading it, you would never even catch little things like seemed like Snape could read minds. Mentions of minor characters. Aunt Marge is mentioned. Other things like that. Little things that seem like just throwaway, one-off, not important lines, but actually come back in big ways later in the series.
Right. She's very, very good at laying groundwork.
Yes.
I almost want to call them like reverse Easter eggs.
Yes, they kind of are, because or you might even just be Easter eggs.
I think an Easter egg is usually like something that you would recognize
when you see it. Yes,
right. This is more like when you go back after the fact, you're like, oh hey,
repeat reading Easter eggs.
So anyway, I wanted to bring this up.
Repeaster eggs.
Repeaster eggs.
I don't like that at all. Nope. Continue. Don't like that at all.
You're in timeout. So in book 2 is where we see Rowling really start to lay the groundwork for some of Harry Potter series' major themes. And I want to offer a little bit of a disclaimer here. I'm not saying that we don't see these themes in book 1. We absolutely do. It's just that book 2 is where they kind of start to be thrown into sharper relief. Both her as the writer and us as the readers are able to focus on those themes a little bit more, in part because we're not quite as focused on world building as we are in the first book. Yeah. So we're able to put a little bit more focus on those thematic elements. Should I explain what a theme is?
Yeah, probably a little bit. Just especially because even without, a lot of people probably know what themes are, but sometimes thematic isn't as necessarily, doesn't follow as clearly for everybody. I know I had trouble initially, or I didn't realize initially what thematic meant. And then I was like, oh, theme. Okay, I get it. Right. But like, yeah. So real quick.
So a theme is an overarching idea or message that you find throughout a piece of work, whether that's a book or a movie or a series of books or movies,
yes.
what have you. So it could be an idea, something like friendship can be a theme, or it can be a more clear message, like racism is bad, can also be a theme.
In terms of a very prominent theme in Lord of the Rings, environmentalism versus sort of, not environmentalism, but agrarian society versus industrialized society.
Yes,
kind of
Tolkien was not one for the industrialism.
No. And so obviously the orcs represent industrialization, whereas the hobbits sort of represent agrarian, more peaceful, green society, if you will.
So I want to talk about, there are a lot of themes in Harry Potter. We're not going to talk about all of them. That could be like a several episode series in and of itself. And they
don't all pop up in this one. I mean, you get more coming later with later books. And we're going to focus on mainly big ones from this book, but also play out throughout the course of the series.
Right. So these are 4 bigger themes that Rowling really focuses on in this book. So one of the big things is an examination of what makes a person who they are, which we see throughout the story, maintaining that Harry's choices are what makes him who he is.
Yes.
More so than any aspect of his birth or his heritage.
Yes.
We have the Dumbledore quote. It's Dumbledore.
It is, yeah.
It, right?
Dumbledore says it about as plainly as you can say
and
it.
It's one of my favorite quotes from Harry Potter, like bar none. It is our choices that make us who we truly are, far more than our abilities. So we have that pretty much spelled out for us.
Which, if you're a determinist like me, doesn't make any sense, but it's a whole other thing for another time. Yeah. We'll assume free will exists in the Harry Potter universe.
We're not getting into it.
I know. Just for the sake of that quote, we'll assume free will exists in the Harry Potter universe. Yeah. Sorry, continue.
But we also see this theme exemplified through characters who attempt to conceal their true identities. Most obviously, we have Professor Lockhart, who pretends to be someone who is brave and knowledgeable and pretty fantastic, when actually what he is a very charming liar.
Yes.
We also have the mystery of the identity of the heir of Slytherin, a much talked about and theorized about mysterious identity.
You mean within
throughout the book?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't find out who the heir of Slytherin is until the very end.
Final couple chapters, yeah.
So our second big theme, then, and this is one that a lot of people are going to recognize. It's something that appears throughout the series that a lot of people talk about. And book 2 is where we really start to get our racism metaphor.
Yeah.
So we have the treatment of non-human characters is one way that we see this. Mostly shown through the introduction of house elves. We learn what they are, and we learn that wizards view them as lesser than.
Yeah. They're essentially slaves.
Yeah.
Sometimes by choice,
It gets a little stickier.
I say by choice. I mean, you can quibble about what that even means in that in the context of house elves. But I mean, some of technically the Hogwarts ones are, I think, implied somewhat by choice. Maybe not. I don't even.
Well, I think it gets a little stickier in like book 4. I think.
Yeah. Where we get into the whole
start
subplot
to meet
with
other house elves,
with Hermione and the House Elf Defense League, or whatever it's called.
But for book 2, we meet Dobby. Right? Dobby is our introduction to house elves, and we see the horrific abuse that he endures at the hands of his quote-unquote family.
Very clearly an unwilling servitude that he is in.
Yes. And I think it's important, too, moving forward with that particular metaphor, that Rowling chooses to introduce that concept to us through a house elf who very much does not want to be bound to a wizard family.
Yeah.
A little more comical example of this same concept, where we see this racism theme, is through the denoming of the Weasleys' garden. It's kind of played for laughs. It's kind of played out like it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
But when you look at that scene and you really think about it, these are living sentient beings and they're just picking them up and flinging them through the air out of the garden.
Yes. I was reminded, we'll talk about more, I guess, in the main episode, but I was reminded so much of the We Free Men. Because they're like, you're off, and there's something about them reminded me of that. It's a Terry Pratchett novel.
That's one of my other favorite series, the Tiffany Aching Adventures by Terry Pratchett. Anyway, so we have the treatment of non-human characters, and we also start to see the racism metaphor through the treatment of non-magical characters with the introduction of the term mudblood as a slur for a muggle-born witch or wizard.
Which I would argue, as per our last episode, that Muggle in itself is already on shaky ground. But
I would not disagree with you.
Yeah.
But at least within the universe of the story, Mudblood is definitely regarded as more of a slur.
Yeah.
Okay, third theme. We're getting into some more interesting stuff here, I think. Stuff that we see come back maybe around book 5. We have criticism of institutional authority, as seen through, again, Lockhart. He's a teacher, someone that we are taught to respect, right? But he's portrayed as incompetent and self-serving, right?
Yeah.
Not worthy of our respect.
Yeah.
Even though we're told, oh, he's a teacher, you have to respect him. Okay? Yeah. So Rowling is kind of undermining that institutional idea of a teacher always being someone you have to respect. Ministry of Magic continues to be presented as ineffectual and more concerned with like bureaucratic minutiae than any kind of actual real problem. Yeah. And again, that's something else that escalates throughout the series.
Yeah, it gets way worse.
Yes.
As the series goes on.
But we're laying the groundwork for it here because nobody is ever particularly complimentary of the Ministry of Magic. You know, like everybody's always kind of like,
Oh, yeah.
Ministry.
Yeah, no, nobody really, likes them or cares about them. Even people that work for them are like, like Arthur Weasley's like,
the last example of this criticism of institutional authority that I want to bring up I think is kind of interesting. It's not something that I noticed when I was younger. I mean, I didn't notice a lot of this when I was younger, but, I was a kid. So at the beginning of the book, Dumbledore says that if Harry and Ron break any more school rules, he's going to expel them. Yeah. Right? That's the law that he lays down. Then at the end of the book, McGonagall literally says, like, you probably broke about 100 school rules to go and do this thing that you did, but Dumbledore doesn't expel them, right? He walks back on that promise, which within the world of the story, technically it undermines his own authority, technically, right? But it also kind of symbolically undermines the authority of the educational institution itself. Right? The message kind of becomes, well, the school's rules don't really mean anything.
Yeah, I would see it more from the angle of that context is important in regards to rules.
I don't disagree with you, but I still think it's a good example of this thematic idea of the criticism of institutions.
Yeah. And that or the criticism that makes a lot of sense there is that sometimes institutions do not take into account the context of a situation when enforcing rules. And so it is a criticism, or not. The fact that they don't enforce the blanket rule of, you broke the rules, you're going to get expelled, sheds light on that. Maybe, at least in my opinion, I think that's the proper response, is that the context is what matters. Because in the beginning they broke a rule, but it was for no real purpose, because the reason he wasn't going to expel them at the beginning is because they couldn't get through the thing. They couldn't get through the barrier to platform 9 3/4, so they take the car and fly it all the way to Hogwarts. Whereas and he explains very clearly, if you had thought about it for like 10 seconds, you could have just waited and got an out. Like, it's not like you weren't going to get to Hogwarts at some point if you didn't, if you didn't immediately take a car and fly there. You could have, So it was a poor decision to break the rules in that instance. Whereas at the end, it was a good decision to break the rules. And so I think it's kind of brings that into the equation.
So our fourth and final theme that I want to bring up is something that is very important to me, especially right about now.
Yeah.
It's warning against passive acceptance of information, especially from sources whose motives and reliability cannot be checked. So the really obvious example of this is Tom Riddle's diary. Both Ginny and Harry accept information from that artifact without much critical thought at all.
Yeah, they just assume it's
they just assume it's legit.
Yeah.
A more lighthearted example is Lockhart's books, which have a pretty clear agenda when you stop to think about it. The agenda is to make him seem amazing.
Yeah.
But in reality, they are part plagiarism and part fabrication.
Yeah.
Right? They're not real.
I was going to mention earlier that baked into the criticism of... It's not a major recurring theme, but speaking of Lockhart, there's definitely a criticism of celebrity.
Yeah. In
this particular book. Again, doesn't really come back from my memory very much throughout the rest of the books that I can remember. But there's definitely, with Lockhart, I mean, it's, he's very clearly his celebrity is the most important thing to him, and being famous and being liked and being wealthy are the things that are most important to him. And it's very much a,
right. I think we can tie that back into the idea of examining what makes you who you are.
Yeah.
Right? To him, that's what makes him who he is, his fame, his notoriety, being liked, being loved.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I think that is where they...
But it's all a sham. So...
All right. Well, that was a fun trip down the learning things lane. Talking about laying thematic groundwork, whereas we talked a little bit in the last episode about laying plot groundwork. Those would be, the difference there, obviously, being the plot story elements that pay off the themes that progress and pay off over the course of the books. So cool. That was fun. Let's move along to our fun facts about Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets.
1 year ago, he learned the truth.
You're a wizard, Harry.
And his first year at Hogwarts School became legend. And so, for Harry Potter and his friends, another year begins.
Bloody birds a menace.
Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, released in July 1998 in the UK and June 1999 in the US. I had forgotten that they used to come out at different times.
Yeah, apparently the UK got them before. Once they got too big, they couldn't get away with doing that
They absolutely could not once the series got big enough.
Because I remember going to the Deathly Hallows midnight release at Barnes & Noble, and it was everywhere in the world got it at the... Well... I guess I don't remember but I'm sure everybody in the world got it within 8 hours of each other, probably. Slightly different time zone, but within 12 hours or something, everybody had them.
And especially with the way that the internet was ramping up.
Yeah, I mean, that was right, what was it, 2005, 6 when the last one came out, roughly? So yeah, the internet was definitely a big thing at that point. Message boards and, Reddit was, all kinds of stuff,
So Rowling apparently struggled to finish The Chamber of Secrets because she was afraid it wouldn't live up to the expectations raised by Book 1, which feels totally understandable.
Yeah.
She actually delivered the manuscript to her publisher on schedule, but then took it back for another 6 weeks of revision.
Never mind. I'm going to do that again.
You know what? I feel that.
Yeah.
I feel it. You'll like this, I think. Early drafts of the book featured nearly headless Nick singing a self-composed song that explained his condition and the circumstances of his death. But this was cut because the book's editor did not care for the song.
That's an editor I can get behind. That song out of the book.
It can be found as an extra on her official website. So if you're interested in the Nearly Headless Nick song, you can go find it.
You know what when I will say this on songs and books, I believe there's the like Kindle or whatever Nook versions of Lord of the Rings. I believe, and I might be making this up because I just wish it was a thing, but I'm pretty sure this is real, that if you do the Kindle, like the ebook version of Lord of the Rings, when you get to songs, you can just hit a play button, and they've like, I don't know who did it or what, but they've like somebody who's recorded
one of the movie versions.
Well, but most of the songs aren't in the movies. From like,
what about the? Oh, I guess I'm thinking of The Hobbit, the old animated Hobbit. Had all the songs
I don't know, but I don't think I'm making this up. That there are like audio files of the songs being sung.
That's pretty sweet, though.
That I'm on board with. That if I can just hit it and listen to it for 30 seconds and then move along, cool, I'm down. I just don't want to read it.
First edition printings of the Chamber of Secrets had several errors in them, which were fixed in subsequent reprints. I've got 2 examples here, so I think we should look for these as we're continuing to read to try to figure out if we've got to this point in the book yet. If we've got early editions or not. One of the mistakes is that Dumbledore initially says that Voldemort was the last remaining ancestor of Salazar Slytherin instead of his descendant. Yeah, totally backwards.
I don't know. We're going to some time travel in The Cursed Child. He might be his ancestor. She might have been laying the groundwork for Cursed Child way ahead of time. I blacked that book out of my memory, so I don't. But I remember there's some weird time travel in it.
I didn't read it on your recommendation.
God, don't. It's so bad. It's
anyway,
so bad. Sorry.
Maybe we can talk about that when we're done with the whole series or something.
Yeah.
Another thing that was incorrect in first edition printings was one of Lockhart's books is sometimes titled Weekends with Werewolves and sometimes Wanderings with Werewolves.
Oh, like throughout the book it changes.
Yeah, it changes titles. I think it's Wanderings with Werewolves might be what they ended up with. That sounds more familiar to me. But I like Weekends with Werewolves because it made me think of, did you ever read the Bailey School Kids books?
Like, or at least it doesn't sound familiar.
Vampires don't drink lemonade or stuff like that.
What Weekends with Werewolves reminds me of is the Treehouse something. There was
the Magic Treehouse
where they traveled through time, and it was like it was always alliterized, and it was
that is more reminiscent of that format. You're right.
Camping with Cannibals, that wasn't one of them, but it was stuff like that. I loved those books. Like Night of the Ninja was one of them that I remember.
I only read a couple of those.
I love those. That was one of my favorite book series when I was a little kid, just because it was like Doctor Who kind of in retrospect, but like just 2 little kids in a TARDIS treehouse.
By like reading books, right?
I think so.
They opened a book and then went to the location of whatever it was.
I think so. I can't remember exactly, but in retrospect, it is. I didn't think about this. I came to my love of Doctor Who way later in life. And now in retrospect, I remember I loved that book series. And it's basically their treehouse was a TARDIS, and they were
basically.
Yeah. All right.
So I think we should be on the lookout for those errors. See what edition we have.
We'll keep an eye
out. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets garnered near universal acclaim when it came out. Critics and audiences both really liked it, with the biggest complaints being that some critics considered the final battle to be a little too scary for young kids. I saw somebody... I didn't write it down because I couldn't find like where this person said it. It was just like the name of a random reviewer.
Right.
Like said that it was on par with Stephen King. And I was like, yeah, okay. I don't think that's right. Sure.
I don't recall it being that scary, but all right.
And then, of course, religious people were still complaining about witchcraft as they do.
That never ended.
Yeah, that's still going on.
Yeah.
Interestingly, though, after all 7 books had come out, some critics backtracked on their initial praise of the Chamber of Secrets and said it was the weakest in the series, citing its plot as near identical to the first book, which...
Not wrong. I mean, especially after you've read the rest. I can see going back and going... Because I think in retrospect, I think it's probably...
I think the first 2 books, much like the first 2 movies, are very similar.
Yeah, they're very similar, and the second one's probably the weakest. I think it is probably the one I read the most when I was a kid, because when it came out the earliest, and then there was more time in between the later ones. So as I kept rereading them, I probably read 2 more than any of them, 1 and 2 more than any of them.
Yeah.
But in retrospect, looking back, it probably is one of the weaker ones, maybe, but it's still
Another thing that they point to in that argument is Fawkes' appearance at the end as an instance of Deus Ex Machina, which I don't disagree with.
Yeah, not necessarily, but most people often misuse Deus Ex Machina because they don't know what it means. But I'd have to think on it, and as I'm rereading it and see if I think it fits, but we'll see.
Yeah. Chamber of Secrets won several awards, including the 1998 Carnegie Award and the British Book Awards Children's Book of the Year, making Rowling the first author to win that particular award 2 years in a row. It also received the first ever Children's Book Award from the Scottish Arts Council. So I like to think that they read this and made an award just for it. And my final fun fact is something that has come up a lot in the years since these books have been out. This is the book that reveals that Harry Potter takes place in the 90s.
Oh, yeah.
As you can add nearly Headless Nick's 500th death day of 1492 to come up with the quote-unquote present date of 1992.
There you go. Set in the 90s, which makes sense. Although we don't see much of the outside world, but...
Yeah. There is an instance where one of the girls is wearing an ornamental butterfly in her hair. So...
There you go.
To me, that says 90s.
90s. All right, let's talk about Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, the film.
Their education in the magical arts continues.
Pixies.
Laugh if you will, Mr. Finnegan. See what you make of them. No!
Old rivalries grow stronger.
Slytherin's got a new seeker.
Malfoy. You nearly got me, Potter!
And something in the school's dark past will be awakened.
The Chamber of Secrets has indeed been opened.
Came out in 2002, a year later. This is the closest gap between, other than 7 Part 1 and 2, which are also a year apart, I think. Because they were filmed at the same time and just released in 2 parts. But these ones were filmed. So filming for this film, for Chamber of Secrets, started 3 days after the premiere of Sorcerer's Stone. Oof. So they were turned around real quick. It's Chris Columbus's second and last Harry Potter directorial effort. We went on to different directors. Well, 3 and 4 had different directors, and then 5, 6, and 7 all had David Yates. I looked it up. 4 was different, and now I can't remember his name, but it wasn't David Yates. And then Alfonso Cuarón famously did 3. So somebody else did 4. Somebody kind of strange who doesn't really fit. Although David Yates at the time, I don't think necessarily would have fit in the universe, but it all worked out. Frank Oz was asked to direct it, apparently.
Really? So
maybe the idea wasn't for Columbus to direct the first 2. It sounds like they asked Frank Oz, and he was like, no. Which seems strange, but seems like it kind of be right up his alley. Yeah, he declined, according to him in an interview. I don't know if that's ever been confirmed outside of that, but so in this film in book and film, we get the introduction of Parseltongue. This is where Harry realizes he can talk to snakes. Well, so I guess technically it's introduced in 1, but we don't know what it is.
Happening.
There's no. But we start to realize what it is in this one, and so it has to be portrayed in the film. So they hired a University of Cambridge linguistics professor named Francis Noland, who actually constructed the language. And I found a really interesting a blog called, and I want to credit it because I came across it, the All Things Linguistic blog allthingslinguistic.com. They also have a podcast if you're into linguistics. I can't remember. I can't remember what it's called. But if you go to that website, it has a link to their podcast on there. So, so this person went to a speech by Francis Nolan, and he was talking about how he created the parcel tongue for the movie. And I thought this was really interesting. So the phonology, he said, it has no rounded vowels or labial consonants. And some of these things you might have to look up to know what they are. I kind of know vaguely what they are. But the reason it doesn't have any rounded vowels or labial consonants is because snakes don't have lips, or their lips aren't very flexible. Right. So he based his inspiration...
Like a snake can't make like an ooh sound.
Yeah, an ooh sound.
Interesting.
It's got pharyngeal consonants, and the reason for that is because some snakes like to constrict things. So pharyngeal consonants are ones where you constrict your throat to say them. I'm trying to think of an example. Maybe if you look up pharyngeal consonants, you'll see what it is. And then the last little tidbit was it's got a large number of fricatives because they exhibit a length contrast. And the reason is because snakes are long.
That might be my favorite reasons for making up a language ever.
Yeah.
Like my favorite language rules ever.
But, what's funny is that when you hear them speak it in the movie, it sounds, and they do it in a way, they put an effect on it as well.
Yeah.
But it's lots of long, hissy kind of sounds, which makes sense.
Yeah. That's interesting. I didn't realize that they had actually put effort into constructing an actual language.
I didn't either.
For that, because they honestly speak so little parcel tongue in the movies. I just assumed that they were like, okay, make hissing sounds.
Yeah, and because that's true, I forgot a lot of the times we hear we hear people speaking English with a weird accent sometimes.
Yeah.
He also does the at the end or whatever when he tells it to open, but... Yeah. He was a little surprised that they wouldn't just come up with a couple words like you would think. And now again, he probably didn't construct a full language. He probably just kind of came up with. They were like, "Hey, let's get a linguistics professor to come up with 12 words that we need or whatever, in a way that he thinks a snake would talk." So I just thought it was interesting. This movie started using handheld camera for a lot of, and I hadn't thought about this or noticed this. I think I noticed it more in later films. But in the first one, they didn't use a handheld at all. But in this one, they start using handheld. And that's opposed to having it on a tripod or on a jib or on a dolly or something. So it just adds, when you shoot, obviously, when you shoot home videos and when how a handheld camera looks, there's shake to it. There's movement to it. There's it's a kinetic feel to it that sort of adds, it gives it a kinetic feel and makes it look less cinematic. In the sense that it looks more... It's a reason why, found footage movies are almost always shot handheld. Or not always shot handheld, because they were shot handheld because it is found footage. But it makes it feel a little more real. Like you're there, as opposed to you're watching a movie, necessarily.
Interesting.
Like a good example, it's the reason, all of Parks and Rec and The Office... Now, that's a very specific example of handheld where it's a documentary style handheld where you're seeing their zooms and all this stuff like that. And then not to mention ignoring the interview part, just when you're watching action play out and that's handheld is because they want it to feel like you're watching something real happening as opposed to watching a film.
Right. As opposed to a 3-camera setup and a sitcom.
And a 3-camera setup is those are not normally handheld, so that's true. But 3 cameras is a whole nother bag of worms that makes it even feel more. I'm not a fan of 3-camera setup.
I know you're not, but I thought it would be something like a good contrast.
Yeah. In 3-camera setups, they're almost always on a big tripod of some sort.
And it feels like you're watching something that's on a soundstage.
Yeah. Well, that's too because you are shooting on a soundstage.
But as opposed to being in the room with somebody.
But and you can make it feel like you're in the room without shooting handheld, and make it feel like real sets without shooting handheld. That's very doable. But handheld I guess the best way, I should have stopped at the very beginning when I said it adds a kinetic feel to it, and it makes things feel a little more like Breaking Bad is almost entirely shot handheld. And it just adds sort of a tension to everything because the camera's always moving.
Okay.
So Apparently, Daniel Radcliffe had to shave his leg for the final scene where he pulls up his pants and shows that he doesn't have a sock on.
What?
Apparently, he had hairy legs already at 12. I don't know. They said it. I found this on IMDb.
So they made him shave his leg?
I get that's what it says for the Dobby scene.
That's
I have to have you clarify what this is.
Okay.
The opal necklace, which plays an important role in the Half-Blood Prince, can briefly be glimpsed inside a display case in Borgin and Burke's in Nocturne Alley.
Opal necklace.
It just said that was all it was described as. It's not talking about the locket, are they?
No, that I think is there's a scene. Although I thought that happened in Order of the Phoenix, but maybe I'm misremembering.
It could be. This is an IMDb trivia thing. It could be a mistake.
But it's in one of those two where one of the like more secondary or tertiary characters is like cursed and she touches it.
I don't remember which one.
I don't remember who it was.
Angelina Johnson or one of those. Or Katie.
Oh, it was Katie Bell.
Katie Bell.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I don't recall which book that is, but I guess it probably is the Half-Blood Prince.
It would have been Half-Blood Prince.
Yes,
that was,
it's the one with what's his name?
Malfoy.
Well, Malfoy's in all of them. Slughorn.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So yeah, it is 6. It's the one that the cursed necklace that makes Katie Bell almost die.
Right.
Because they're trying to kill. Yeah.
Spoilers.
So interesting. So look out for that. It's apparently there. Same one. And
that makes sense.
Yeah. Interesting that they would know that this far ahead to have that. Or maybe again, this is a case of they didn't know that, but they just wanted a cool old necklace. And then they're like, wait a second. We had that cool old necklace from 2 laying around. That would be cool if we made that the one. But
we also know that Rowling occasionally told them things that would be important later.
She was heavily involved in the production. So it could be. It's just, to me, that seems like a very specific detail for her even to have.
Right.
That's not like a big character moment. That's sort of a minor plot point from. But again, she's that good. I wouldn't be surprised.
She connects the dots like that.
Yep. Although it's based on the second shortest book, which is the first one is the shortest. This is the longest film.
Is it?
Apparently. Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, which is based on the longest book, is the second shortest film.
Huh.
It's interesting because, what's funny is that these first 2, I said they're like all the same length. I looked, they're all within, 2, and now it says it's the longest film. It's probably like 5 to 10 minutes longer than some of the later ones. Like they're all like 220 to 240. Like they're all within that ballpark. But it is what you notice when you watch these first 2 and now rereading them, they don't leave much out.
Right.
There's very little cut from these first 2 books / movies because in terms of like big things, because there's a lot less to include because the books are shorter and the movies are still the same length. So 14 Ford Anglias were destroyed to create the scene where Harry and Ron crash into the Whomping Willow. And they used it is the same car that is mentioned in the book that Arthur Weasley bewitched to make it fly. But they destroyed 14 of them for the scene where they crash into the Whomping Willow, which I thought was wild.
It's a lot of cars. How did they find that many of the same car? That's like an older car, isn't it?
It is an older car, yeah. I probably just have them sitting around over there. I mean, it's not that old of a car. I think it's like from the 80s, maybe.
Oh, okay. I was thinking it was a little older than that.
Maybe 70s, but it's not like a crazy old car. There are 2 instances in this movie where you can see copies of the Harry Potter novels in the movie. Supposedly. I've never noticed this. But here's where they are if you're rewatching and you haven't watched it yet. When Hagrid is escorting Harry out of Nocturne Alley, you can see him. Apparently it's somewhere, maybe in the background on like a shop window or something. And then again, when Lockhart turns to show his profile to the photographer when he's in the bookshop, apparently there's hardcovers of Harry Potter on the shelf near him.
We'll have to watch for that because I've never noticed that.
Yeah. This is fun. Hugh Grant was originally cast as Gilderoy Lockhart, but had to withdraw at the last moment for scheduling conflicts.
That would have been interesting.
Yeah, he would have
worked.
worked.
He
would have been fine. Yeah, the right look, and he can be kind of pompous and
smarmy.
Yeah, smarmy British guy. Yeah. I mean, Kenneth Branagh's great, but
Kenneth Branagh kills it.
Yeah, he's perfect. But yeah, Hugh Grant I think would have been fine too. And finally, Eddie Redmayne eventually cast as Newt Scamander in the Fantastic Beasts films, auditioned for the role of Tom Riddle.
Really?
Yep. didn't get it. Lost it out to some other guy.
Went to that handsome guy.
Yeah, who was 27, I read at the time. There's 2 characters in this that are played by much older people, even though they are kids. One is him. Tom Riddle's played like a 27-year-old. Mm-hmm. Well, the older Tom Riddle. Right. Because we see little kid versions of him. And Moaning Myrtle, played by like a 36-year-old.
I think I did know that.
The oldest Hogwarts student portrayed by... the oldest actor to portray a Hogwarts student was her, the character that plays, or the actress that plays Moaning Myrtle, who's also in an episode of Doctor Who. Although most of the people in this show have been in these movies have been in an episode of Doctor Who at some point. So that's all I got. I mean, there's a bunch more, but I would just go on for hours. And those were the most interesting things I found that I thought would be fun to look out for when you're rewatching the film, because that's it. Next week, we're talking about Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Until that time comes, if you could do us a big favor, subscribe. No, you don't subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever else you download our podcast. You can also rate and review us on Facebook. You can go to our Facebook page, our Twitter, our Goodreads, our Instagram. We have all of those. Katie posts pictures and fun memes and whatnot. She handles all that. Occasionally I'll be like, Katie should post a picture of that, but I let her do the rest of that. She's pretty good at it. But yeah, you can check us out on all social media. Just search This Film Is Lit.
I think that's it.
So until next time, keep reading books, keep watching movies, and keep being awesome.